These ones are too big.
It's a big one.
They're lies, okay. All right. So if there's any questions at this point about the slides we've seen, discussion, probably the biggest thing out there is the resident, non-resident, who's included in this. And also the single head of household, if they get a different rate. And we may want to do that. And again, non-residents. So if there isn't anything else, I think we can go back to Julia. And we are on slide 17 now, right?
All right, I'm on.
No, we're actually,
Yeah, we're scooting.
22.
we're really moving along here. Yep. Now we get to the graphs,
For the visual people.
the visual people. Also, it's where we start to see who gets impacted and how much.
Yes. So Julie Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. We're looking at the slide deck that's on the committee page under my name for folks watching via YouTube. And on slide 21, section D. And this is, as I was talking about before the break, we're going to be diving into what are the modeling and considerations of a homestead owning household. So that's the first part of the equation, that first group we're going to look at. And so the first set of charts that we're going to be looking at are education taxes as a percentage of income for homestead owning households. And these, we set this up first because this seems to be charts that the committee has looked at in the past. And so we just wanted to provide some more context for these different options. So moving on to slide 22, we have current law. And this is going back to what Representative Kornheiser was alluding to earlier. This is when we're getting into this color coding. So here we see the light blue. Throughout the presentation, these light blue bars will always refer to current law, so it's easier to follow. So looking at figure 3 here, we're looking at the net homestead property tax as a percentage of income for homestead owning households by ventile. So this should look very familiar. We've seen this before. We've got the total education tax as a percentage of household income on our vertical axis. And then we've got the household income ventiles on our x-axis. That's those 20 equal groups based on household income. So then moving on to slide 23, we're looking at what would this look like for option 1A. Option 1A, you will recall, has that minimal homestead tax rate. And here we see the green, as we'll see throughout the presentation, is showing the minimal income tax, the minimal homestead property tax as a percentage of income. And the dark blue is showing the education income tax as a percentage of income. So this gets back to, I think it was Representative Conlon's question and Senator Pearson. Why were we looking at a second set of brackets in option 1? And it was because we were seeing here in these lowest few ventiles, that regressivity that the committee had said that they were not interested in seeing or trying to address that. You really do see that the regressivity is really based on that minimal homestead property tax. The green bars. And this is looking only at the homestead owning households. So seeing these results before moving on to option 1B, we wanted to look at these results in comparison with current law and see how things would shake out only for these homestead owning households. So I'm on slide 24 now. This is just, figure 5 is really just overlaying the two graphs that we were just looking at. So the light blue being current law, and then the darker, wider bars being option 1A. So what you're seeing here is that compared to current law, under option 1A, homestead owning households in the lowest ventile and in the top ventile pay more under this, pay more in terms of the total education tax as a percentage of their income than they do currently under current law. And I think it's really interesting to note that we're seeing this with the lowest ventile, given the bracket, the marginal education income tax rate that we saw for that lowest ventile, as well as knowing that the minimal homestead property rate is on average 18 cents, minimum of 13 cents. We're still seeing that here. And that's something that we were really coming across in the modeling, was that because the current system with the property tax credit and the education fund circuit breaker, these lowest ventiles really are paying very little. So it's hard to adjust or model a new system that has these lowest ventiles still paying that low amount.
And the circuit breakers,
Yes.
super circuit breakers, they also limit, this is just the state $1.10, right? These lower groups are limited on their local property tax as a total, which includes municipal tax. Is that?
Yeah, so the circuit breaker, which is for households under 47,000, that limits the percentage for the municipal taxes as well as limits the percentage for the statewide property
And
tax.
would we be doing away with that limit on the municipal taxes?
So that's also a policy decision. We haven't touched anything that's related to municipal taxes in any of this modeling.
Just trying to understand this. So under current law, I'm looking at page 24. I hope I'm on the right page. Okay.
Yeah,
It's under current law, this lowest ventile is paying, I don't know, 3.25%. How is that possible with the super circuit breaker?
Well, we did away with it.
No, this is current law.
No, current law.
This is, current law.
oh,
I mean, it wouldn't seem to me like that would even be possible with our current system with the circuit breaker.
What's the percentage you're limited to?
At that, it's like 0.5% or something, or 1%. It's really low.
Right, because I also wondered.
This is for homeowners only, right? So
That's who gets the super circuit breaker
Yeah.
protection.
that's a great question. I'd have to go back and look
Okay. Right.
as to what we're seeing there.
I mean, if it's not, it makes it look even worse if it is lower, but
Right.
so.
this
I
is,
think that Abby has a potential idea, or
Do you want me to pipe in from the side?
Sure.
I did not work on the modeling, so I don't know. I'm just guessing that it might have something to do with the mismatch between household income and AGI, but I don't know. That's-
Oh,
Yes.
okay, that could be.
Okay.
yeah, I think that is a.
Okay, all right.
I think that would make sense. I could go back and look at it in more detail, but that makes sense.
Yeah, that could make sense. Okay.
any guess what the dollar amount between, whatever that is, 3.25 and 3.5 equates to? Because I'm seeing this as a challenge to have one model that we then push through the computer, as opposed to there would be nothing to prevent us to say,
I think the next slide will answer your question.
Yes, you are just queuing me up.
sorry, oh yeah, look at that, yeah.
So I'm on slide 25 now, and this is
$6.
addressing Senator Pearson's question, where when we look at slide 24, we see this as a percentage of income, but what does that actually mean in terms of the average tax dollars that folks are paying within these different ventiles? So in slide 25, we're seeing that while the lowest ventile and the highest ventile are the two ventiles that would be paying more as a percentage of their income, the scale with respect to how much more they would be paying, very dramatic. We see that for the lowest ventile on average, their education tax would be an increase of $46 we see that for the highest ventile, the average tax change would be $4,900 or almost $5,000.
Okay, right now, I'm paying over $8,000 in property tax. I'm gonna pay less according to this, because everybody other than no income and very high income. But that's the total income tax that somebody making over $262,000 would pay. Is that the average?
That's the average change
So it would,
under this proposal. So it's looking at, if we go to slide 24, and we see the two red circles around the difference in bars.
okay, yeah.
So we're saying, so we were looking at that and we were wondering, what does that look
Okay, so they'd be paying almost $5,000 more than they are
on average?
paying
Correct.
based on their property value.
Correct.
Okay,
And that's on average, because I mean, that's a huge range, 262,000 up.
yeah, up to a million to infinity.
Yes. And you see in the structure of just the graph on 25 is kind of flipped on its head, right, from 24, as you would expect, because we have $0 almost in the middle of that chart on slide 25.
Is the graph, the data for this, where it's laid out on page 23, is that the effective income rate? So it handles, because it's sort of surprising to me that it's virtually flat. And so I'm wondering if, you understand my question?
I'm not understanding.
So the rates that we're talking about is 1.5, there's the brackets. So your effective rate is, is this graphing the effective rate based on assuming you're an average school, I guess?
This is looking at applying those, like if you go back to the brackets, I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but if you go back to the brackets on slide 8.
Yeah.
So if you're married and your age for the AGI that you have from 0 to 47,000, you're paying 1.25.
Right. But if you earn 150,000, you're not, it's what, 2%. I'm not looking at page 8, but you're not.
I think Graham has an answer.
You're not paying one rate. It's a.
Correct.
So that's what I just want to clarify, if this is giving you the effective rate, right? So.
Yeah, Senator, can I jump in here? So it looks relatively flat here, and in terms, I'm looking at slide 24 for the chart. It looks relatively flat, but you can see sort of the green part really tails off as you get up in the income distribution. So what that means is that the blue is picking up more and more and more. Yep. And so it is progressive. What I would say, however, is that option 1A, the way the bracket structures, it starts at 1.5%, then goes 1.75 to 2 to 2.25. And just a sort of outside lesson about the income distribution is that, 85% of people, or 85, maybe a little bit less, but roughly 80% of personal income tax payers are going to fall under the $90,000 AGI group here. And so what that means is that effective tax rates for option 1, are generally about it's not drastic. So what you see is that most income is hitting in the 1.5 to 2% range. And so overall, the effective tax rate change for the entire population, not the homeowners, but the overall, is about, 1.6 or so across everybody. But the key point that I would make is that, as I said on slide 24, is that the blue block is picking up more and more, but just the fact that this very small homestead tax rate is quite regressive at the lower ends, it picks up the majority of the change, or the majority of the effective tax rate paid, whereas in the upper end it's mostly income tax.
Thank you.
Any other questions about what we're seeing here? In option 1A before moving on? Okay, not seeing any. Moving on to option 1B. These slides are set up in the same order, the same color, the same structure as what we were just looking at for option 1A, but it's with those different brackets. And what you see here in slide 26, when looking only at those homestead owning households, you see that even with that adjustment in the rates to try to make it less regressive, we're still seeing for the lowest ventile that the curve looks regressive here. And it really is because of that property tax as a percentage of income.
And if it's only $45 for people in that tax range who are hitting the food shelves, $45 is a lot of money.
Right. So that we were anticipating that the committee was going to wonder or ask about this option and the $45. And so that's why we went forward and created the second set of brackets for option 1B. And so you see, when compared to current law on slide 27, that for option 1B, it's only the top ventile that's paying more as total education tax as a percentage of income. The lowest 19 ventiles pay less in total education tax as a percentage of income. But as we just mentioned in the previous slide, it still is regressive for the bottom two ventiles because of the homestead property tax, that green bar that we're looking at. And so, Representative Beck?
You can't get that property tax low enough to save them.
Exactly. That is kind of the big, one of the big takeaways, right? That if that property tax is going to be staying in here, we can't get that curve as the committee has expressed desire to get it. Of course, it is a policy decision. But you see on slide 26, how small that blue chunk is, and the great majority for that lowest two ventiles is being made up by the homestead property tax. Going back to talking about the current system, the circuit breaker.
On a dollar number, it looks still positive, but it looks like it's 50 cents.
Yeah, so if
28.
If on slide 28, that's that average education tax change for homestead property owners. We're still only talking about homestead owning households. So for the highest ventile, it's an average increase on top of what they're currently paying of $5,200.
For the lowest, what is that number?
For the lowest, it's a little bit of a decrease.
Oh, it is a decrease.
It is a decrease.
I can tell if it's a decrease.
I know, because it's so small. That's something I have in my model, but I don't have pulled up in front of me. So I would need to get back to you with what decrease it would be, but it would be a decrease.
From 1A to 1.
Very, very, very minimal.
A 1A was $46, 1B is negative $10 or something.
Yeah.
The real benefit are the people that are now not covered by income sensitivity, the 91 up to the 262, their property taxes would go down and be covered by people that are wealthier than they are.
Or the folks who are covered by income sensitivity, but to such a small extent that it doesn't really make a difference in communities like, say, Burlington.
Yeah. And I do think that, we're looking at averages and we're looking at aggregate for these ventiles. Within each ventile, there are going to be increases and decreases dependent on that ratio of their property wealth and income.
If you are very wealthy and still live in the family raised ranch In a poorer community, you're going to pay a whole lot more. If you live in a mansion, might break even or might pay a little more.
Yeah, exactly. So that is another question, going back to those big picture questions, who should be paying and how should that be determined? And that's really what we're seeing here. And we're seeing that there are decreases on average for the lowest ventiles, but because it is a zero-sum game, those decreases are going to be made up by other folks, in part by the top ventile, but also in large part by that expansion
The other,
to all of the people who currently aren't paying a direct education tax. And so moving on to the slide 29, we're seeing again the same structure of these graphs, colors. And slide 29 is showing you option 2. So option 2 is once we remove the homestead property tax completely, and we're only applying the education income tax. And this is what it's looking like for those homestead owning households. And we see that regressivity at the lowest ventiles is gone now that we've removed the property tax completely.
I have a question, and maybe you folks in the tax committee can answer better. But Senator Pearson brought up earlier this idea of that's been sort of our policy, cap at the top end. And I guess at some point, do we see what the impact of that might be?
In the modeling that we've done here, we haven't done any modeling looking at the cap.
I'm just curious to know if we were to take down that policy, what's the impact throughout the rest of the ventiles?
Or sometimes
It would all go up.
Yeah.
someone that sells off the family camp to pay their nursing home bills. They're going to be in that top bracket 1 year. And I think it's 50% that are in that bracket 1 year and not there the next. There's a lot of churn in that top bracket.
However, I recently learned, I didn't know this until recently, that it's not that the majority of those folks are like way down below and then pop up. It's that there's a large swath of folks that hang out right at the edge of that bracket and sometimes pop over and sometimes go under. It's not folks who are making $30,000 a year and suddenly have a windfall of $1 million.
Interesting. And
Graham is nodding because I think yes, thank you, Graham. I did not make up that.
Well, I guess my basic question is, I just don't know if that's a lot of money or just it's not or it's inconsequential.
Did you want to?
Well, my memory is it's not a ton of money for the fund. It would be, a significant amount of money for a filer maybe, but there's so few people. So I don't know if you guys have that.
I don't know that number off the top of my head. What I was going to talk to was sort of a bigger picture consideration. To your point, Representative Conlon, where we have what we've modeled here is expanding it to all resident AGI. And as soon as there's any caps introduced or any credits introduced or any help to any groups, be it everybody above a certain threshold, renters, students, whatever it is that the committee decides to do, that in turn will cost money. And that money needs to be made up somehow. And if it's going to be made up by this tax, then we're going to see the rates will need to increase to raise the cost of those support mechanisms for those groups.
And if I can jump in here real quick, so just for some data for the committee. So what Julie is showing here again is only homestead owning households, and these are the ventiles of that population, which means that they're about 5%. There's 5% in every single bar here, 5% of the population. That highest ventile, 262, 592, obviously goes up, but the total amount of money raised by this policy from the homestead owning households and the homestead owning households is about $474 million. And based upon the modeling that I've done, for people making over $300,000, so not exactly the same ventile here. So for AGIs over 300,000, 117 of the 474 is coming from that group of people. And so what I would say is it's quite a significant chunk of change. It's about a fourth of the money is coming from, roughly, 5-ish% of the filers. So I guess if the committee were to consider a cap, I would say, just based upon what I'm seeing in this data, it would take a pretty notable increase in the effective tax rates for every other group depending on the cap that you wanted to set. But even $500,000 and over, it's still $80 million from that group. So it's not a small chunk of change.
We may well, there's been discussion, people have thrown it out during the campaign, of putting that top bracket, redividing it out. We collapsed them a number of years ago, and there's been talk about raising that, which would adjust things, I think, a little differently. But I'll be surprised if that bill doesn't show up in one of our committee rooms this year. I don't know if it'll go, but it'll be out there for discussion.
This is like the millionaire tax idea type of thing, or?
No, we just putting that fifth bracket back in.
Yeah, okay.
Again, is a way to get more income from higher income people.
That 30%, I really worry about that 30% because I imagine a lot of that is business sales, when you start to get up to that level. And I wonder how volatile that 30% is relative to what income itself, which is even more volatile than property. I mean, if that 30% changed by 10%, it would be significant.
Yeah, I guess I can comment on that. Yeah. Certainly that group, the incomes for those group of people or the types of income that the people who are in those income groups are significantly more volatile than the ones below. This is mostly capital gains income. Not mostly, but a good chunk of it is capital gains income. I would say though, while the income up there is volatile, it's not as if in 1 year we have, say, 2,500 taxpayers making over 500, and then the next year we have 1,000. It's sort of the group of people might not be the same, but if you're solely concerned about how much money you're going to raise from this group, I think it's relatively stable in that sense. I think depending upon the types of dynamics that are happening in sort of these shocks that you're referring to. So if we see a giant sell-off in the stock market, then you might see this group being disproportionately affected by that type of change. You might raise the effect on revenue might be more significant from that group versus. So I'd say sort of you're right, but also there's a stabilizing force there. There's always sort of a same level of people up in that group. It's just that the total amount of income is more volatile because of the types of income that these people earn.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'm moving on to slide 30. Again, this is the comparison between option 2 and current law for the homestead owning households as a percentage of income. So this whole time we're looking as a percentage of income, except for when we're looking at these green charts that are showing your average tax change. And we're seeing that for the lowest 19 ventiles, they will pay less in total education tax as a percentage of income. and that's the homestead owning households. And we see the top ventile still pays more. So that's consistent across all of these modeling results that we're showing you here. And moving on to slide 31, we see that it's still in the same ballpark, but a bit higher for that average bill change, education tax change for the highest ventile, where it's about 6,000 on average higher for the top ventile of homestead owning households. So that leads into sort of the big takeaways that we were thinking from looking at all of these charts on slide 32 here. For most homeowners, the amount paid towards the direct amount paid towards education would decrease because there's so many more people who aren't homeowners that would be paying more or paying a new tax, direct tax. As I just mentioned, under both option 1 and option 2, the highest ventile of homestead owning households would pay a larger percentage of income towards education than they do under current law. As we also talked about, it's very difficult to make the lowest ventile or ventiles pay less in tax or eliminate complete regressivity with the inclusion of the property tax because of the property tax credit and current circuit breaker, which means that those ventiles pay very little in the current system.
How much money are we actually raising from the bottom 2 ventiles in, say, option 2, if we were going to rebate that?
That is actually the next section that we're going to look at.
Great.
Very satisfying when the question is,
I know you get
where we're going.
You get such a great face from it.
Patience.
No, but it's great because it means that both you all are interested in knowing the answers to the questions that we were thinking, the same questions that we were having and wanted to explore. So just the final takeaway before we move on to how much is being paid is that option 2 allows for more flexibility to adjust the progressivity because of being able to adjust those rates by bracket and not including the property tax. So before moving on to section D continued, where we talk about the total education tax raised by homestead owning households, are there any questions? I don't know if the committee wants to discuss what you've seen thus far.
It's this third bullet on the takeaways, which we talked a little about before, but you say to they pay so little, which makes sense. But then when we look at the graphs about what they pay, they're paying 3%, which is not little. So I'm just trying to square those two things. Like it's 3%, which is one of the highest, but yet we're saying it's little. Are we talking dollars, not percentage?
We're talking dollars, not percentage, and I'll look into why the chart is coming up that way with the circuit breaker. I do think it has to do something with the income sensitivity, but and the difference in household income and AGI, but I'm not sure. I don't know, Graham, you have to.
No, I just want to elaborate on this. I think that's an excellent point, Senator Perchlik. I think we are talking dollars here, but I think it's worth emphasizing for these lowest ventiles, just how much the current property tax system even though they're paying still around 3%. You can think of this as one of the things that came out of our modeling here is we were modeling a homestead property tax rate of something like 18 cents, and it was still leading to them paying more in tax. And so it's almost, you can almost think of this as, under the current system, even though the average homestead rate in the state's about $1, what was it, Representative Beck said, $1.40-ish, it's as if this group is paying somewhere less than 30 cents after the circuit breaker and the property tax credit is applied to this group. And so the sort of takeaway that Julie and I, had to sort of rub our eyes over and over and over again and try to make this, go make the sort of increase go away is that, even with a tiny tax rate, this group still ends up paying more, and we still end up with a regressive curve because of it. So that's I think maybe the language here is not exactly what we want to say, but it's more sort of to highlight that for those lowest two ventiles, it's just the current system. If the goal is to make sure that we minimize to the maximum extent we can the amount that they pay, it seems to be achieving that pretty well with the circuit breaker. And so if you remove income sensitivity and just even have a tiny yield, it's very hard to make them whole again.
I have an assumption that I just want to say out loud so you can check me on it, because I don't want it just sort of floating around in my brain unchecked. That those very lowest ventiles, I imagine, wouldn't be paying a mortgage because they likely wouldn't be able to afford a mortgage at that ventile level. And so that's why I'm asking someone to check it, that like that's just like information that I created magically in my brain that might not be true. And then at the higher ventiles, you're sort of more likely to see folks carrying mortgages.
I don't know. I guess I would say I don't necessarily think that. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't assume that lowest ventile people are mortgageless. I could imagine a significant number of seniors who are in that group who bought their home a long time ago, own their home, but their income primarily consists of Social Security, and that would put them into the lowest ventiles. So,
but they wouldn't be paying a mortgage because they bought their home a long time ago, right?
Right. So yeah. So these people down below here, a fair amount might not have a mortgage.
I have been amazed when I was selling real estate of people that have owned their homes for 30 plus years who still own a mortgage.
They've refinanced a bunch of times.
Refinance, kids' education, home repairs, a lot of it. But we've done a lot of work with, they're not mobile homes anymore.
Manufactured homes.
Manufactured homes, yes, to allow people to have very affordable mortgages. So you could find people that do have a mortgage in these lower. I don't know if all the Irene rehousing we did has been paid off, but I know we did a lot for loans for manufactured homes. Either that or you're living in the old, you could be living in the old family home, but they take a lot of money to keep them standing upright.
You have the phenomena of people that are migrating to Vermont later in life. They come from areas where they sell their house, they have a ton of cash, and they just roll up here and pay cash at homes.
But they may not be that income level.
Right.
Yeah.
No, they aren't. Okay.
Thanks for helping me process through that.
Great.
It's a mixed
You got a
bag.
answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of these big complex questions that we can only get to at some level of granularity before it becomes more anecdotal and difficult to spell out in numbers.
Yeah, I think we can, you said between, in any one of these groups, there's going to be some winners and some losers, just because of all the different circumstances.
Right. And I know I keep hammering on this, but I just think it's really important to keep in mind that so far we're only looking at homeowners.
Yes.
So we haven't gotten to the other folks,
But they're in here.
but they're in there later on.
Coming soon.
Coming. Okay.
Okay, so moving on to address Representative Kornheiser's question. Next section is looking at total education taxes raised by homestead owning households under these proposals. So the section starts in slide 33. Slide 34 is showing you this should also look familiar. This is what it is under current law, the total amount raised by homestead owning households by ventile. You've got amount raised in millions on the y-axis and the same household income ventiles that we've been looking at so far.
Okay. So under the present system, that top bracket is in actual dollars, paying more.
Yes. So slide 35, this is going back to that option 1A with the minimal property tax, the first option that we looked at. Same colors as before. So we're seeing green is the total amount raised on property tax. And you can see that that is very, very, very minimal, as we would expect, because it's raising about 60 million of the 460 million that we need to raise. The remainder, the blue bar, is the total raised on the education income tax. So you can see that the curve shifts substantially. And slide 36, once again, overlays current law and option 1A. So this first bullet point that's in bold here, homestead owning households are raising $91 million less than what they would raise under current law. So that's that shift, right? So we're seeing that these middle 18 ventiles are paying significantly less in total taxes to the education fund. But overall, there's not the same amount of money isn't being raised. So we do see that compared to current law under option 1A, both the lowest ventile and the top ventile pay more in total taxes to the education fund. The lowest ventile paying a bit more, and the highest ventile paying significantly more. And those numbers I actually don't have I didn't include in the slide deck, but I could pull them up for you if you're interested. So option 1B looks relatively similar to option 1A, but if you recall, option 1B was modeled to address that regressivity a bit as much as we could for the lowest ventile. So if we go to slide 38, we're looking at, once again, option 1B for the total taxes raised by homestead owning households compared to what are currently being raised under current law. And we see here the discrepancy or the difference is that homestead owning households are raising $122 million less than what they would raise under current law. So that's $122 million that needs to be made up elsewhere. Because of the way that this has been modeled to address what we thought was one of the committee's concerns and would be one of the committee's concerns in option 1A, we see now that the lowest 19 ventiles of homestead owning households would be paying less in total education taxes to the education fund. And the highest ventile is paying a significantly larger share of education funds.
They're still around 100 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. 91 versus 122.
So option 2, this is the same construct of these charts that we're looking at, but now we're looking at option 2 here on slide 39, the total amount raised by homestead owning households by ventile. And slide 40 shows that overlaid with current law. So this is an even bigger bump in terms of that difference that's not being raised by homestead owning households under this option, where we estimate $132 million less than what is raised by these people under current law.
I guess when I look at that chart, which is gradual until it gets there and then it jumps. I'm starting to wonder about vulnerability to lawsuits and equity issues,
Well, this isn't a percentage, right? This is the dollar.
this is hard dollars.
So it's the treatment where you have a equal protection is small, it's a tiny bump of percentage.
It's more the last.
I mean, I'm seeing an increase, I don't know, 65, 70% increase in the taxes that they pay. And that makes me start to worry about flight. And I also see that almost all of our other ventiles are going to get a significant tax break. I wonder if maybe there isn't a happy medium in here between tax breaks and tax increase.
Better structure, but less dramatic.
But it's important to,
Still progressive, but
I think it's important to remember this chart.
yeah.
It's a lot, but it's $5,000 average. So it isn't, I mean, I don't know if people are fleeing the state to not pay $5,000.
It's a lot of effort for 5,000.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, that's an increase. It's 5,000
Right,
on top of what they're already
40 grand
paying,
plan, yeah.
along with what they're already paying in income
Right.
tax.
I worry about the general fund, 2% pay 36%. If even a few of those 2% start to,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's. And if we use it here, we can't use it somewhere else.
True.
So, okay.
Graham, did you want to chime in on this? I saw you pop up.
I was just gonna, I think the committee's all making valid points. I would just remind the committee that the slide 22, I think it's possible to make this sort of chart looks not as dramatic, but if we look at the effective tax rates, the highest ventile is, pays the lowest share of their income. So even bringing that up to even close to a statewide average means bringing the total amount of dollars in the education fund coming from that committee by a significant amount. And so it's, JFO, of course, model things that make what slide are we talking about here again? Lost my spot. Make slide 39 look a little bit smoother, but then you might not satisfy to the extent that you're looking for the smoothness or the progressivity of the effective tax rate chart. You're kind of competing in two different charts here. And that, as I said, the effective tax rate chart for that highest ventile, the bar is quite low. So even if you bring them up close to a statewide average, you're going to see this chart on slide 39 look, I think, similarly dramatic as it is here.
Yeah, because this is doing it in hard dollars, not as percentage of income.
Right. And you can see that in, slide 34 shows what it is under current law, and that is the gradual upward slope. So that's, I think, a really good example of the difference between looking at percentage of income versus looking at total dollars raised.
Because we know that the upper groups pay it. Is it 10% pay 50%? You had three.
For 2% pay 36.
Yeah.
Well, and that's because that group has the vast majority of the wealth to pay. I just I don't want to lose track of that reality as when you don't have that overlay here.
There's a lot more money moving, hard dollars moving at the top end because, that's just a fact.
Because we've designed policies over the last 50 years in America to make that happen.
But if one of them leaves, it hurts a lot more than if one of me leaves.
We'd miss you if you left.
It would hurt me more.
Okay.
So that slide 41 kind of wraps up this look at homestead owning households. And I think summarizes really a lot of the committee's discussion that under both option 1 and option 2, the highest ventile would pay significantly larger total share of education fund revenues. And the reduction in the total share of education fund revenues for the lowest 18 or 19 ventiles is offset by 2 parts. And I know I keep hammering this home, but it's offset by that highest ventiles increase as well as the new tax responsibility on people who don't own homestead property, which is teaser for what we have prepared either for after lunch or that's what's up next.
And you'd like us to remember that point?
Okay. Yeah, and then this afternoon, we have
Renters.
renters are coming in, and they may be a little bit out of place, but there were scheduling issues. And then we're going to move on to talk about non-property owners, right?
Well, I don't think it is out of place. I think it's.
It's
I think
part
we're
of the
gonna-
non-property owners.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it okay if I jump into
Yeah.
a conversation? The keeping the homestead lever versus not keeping the homestead lever. And that's sort of harder to be like just really spending a minute on option 2 versus option 1B. I'm just sort of curious people's thoughts on that so far.
I just would say that if we're going to talk about keeping the non-homestead as a lever, that we need to talk about breaking the non-homestead tax categories up into the different groupings, so that you would have.
We're going to be talking about that this year anyway, so we might as well talk about it.
Instead of just one big bucket.
Right, so the landlords of rental properties are treated the same as.
There's
So if
commercial
we-
properties and second home.
Are treated the same.
I'm saying we need to look at not treating them the same.
So you're saying if we do option 2, we need to expand the lever of non-homestead versus with 1B,
yeah.
we would
Right.
have the lever of homestead as well. Okay.
Interesting. You said they need to have landlords and second homes be treated differently. What about businesses? To me, the
Oh, yeah,
landlords and
and-
businesses are, I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, there's a clear just 3 categories, but I don't.
Farm.
Business, second home, and then
Farmers.
Yeah.
Farms.
Well, the argument was when we did that non-homestead is the business doesn't get to vote on the school budget,
Yeah.
but gets to pay for it. Landlords, on the other hand, renters get to vote on the school. So there is a distinction there is, and then there's second homeowners who don't get to vote, but do own residential property.
Sales tax payers don't get a vote.
Or they-
Or they may, or they may
No,
not, depending
they
on who
don't.
they are.
Well, they vote for us who raises their sales tax.
But for me, the fact that it's much harder to make the homes, it seems like one of our goals in all this was simplifying. I'm sort of curious about folks.
I've
The-
given up on that.
No, that's why, one of the reasons why I would like to do option 2. I mean, I think this second part.
You think option 2 is simpler?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Way simpler.
Way simpler. yeah.
Option, I'm glad we.
think 1B is simpler.
Really?
And it doesn't seem to add much value to me.
1B doesn't have much value to you.
Well, either one, the one that keeps a tiny homestead rate doesn't, I'm not sure what the point is. I mean, I was interested in seeing what its impact, and now I'm not as interested.
There's no simplicity benefit between 1A and 1B. They're just.
No, 1B is just more progressive than 1A.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But by an option 2, you get rid of the whole homestead
Property tax.
property tax. So that makes a huge difference.
But you still have, but you add the changing the homes, changing the education rate, the income.
The equation isn't simpler.
The equation's quite
The
complicated
whole system is simplified because you took it out a whole,
because you've taken out a whole tax category.
whole like part of those interlocking gears that make up the system. We're taking one of those out. But the equation to figure out what you're paying is still complicated, for sure.
And then you get the year-to-year.
Yeah, those issues are really important. And then this whole thing about how renters are impacted is really important.
I think.
That's this afternoon.
I think in option 2 or 1, you can solve the year-to-year problem by just doing a withholding and a tax filing instead of a rebate on your property tax. I think you can solve the year-to-year problem without either of those two ways of doing it.
We'll hear from,
I assume we're going to feel very troubled when we figure out where the other $132 million is coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
think we
that's that too. Yeah.
And then the equity on 1 versus 2. Is 2 also clearly more equitable to people?
yeah,
I think so, except for the renters.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
we have to have this conversation
Yeah.
after the second part.
But I mean, I'll say for me, I was interested in keeping de minimis homestead tax to see if it helped with some of these outliers, the funder that lives in a really low income, some of, you're, exactly. And the data's not showing, I mean, there's so few in that situation that I don't know, the graphs certainly aren't going to be that way versus the regressivity problem that we have. It's pretty significant.
yeah. Okay, so it sounds like we're leaning to a straight income tax, right? And leaving out the property tax lever for homeowners so far.
Seems like Julia has something she wanted to jump in with.
Julia?
I do have an answer to Representative Beck's question from earlier on as to why current law looks the way it does.
Yeah.
And it's not directly related to this conversation, so I can address that later or now.
I think
Might
we're
as well.
running out of steam here, so if you've got an answer, that would
Okay.
be helpful.
It's because the income sensitivity and circuit breaker only applies to house site value. And we're looking at total net home.
Oh, okay, you got that factor too.
So
There you
when
go.
I go back and I pull up the data that I have to run those charts, if you're only looking at current law net house site as percent of income, then you see 1.7% for the lowest ventile, 1.9% and up.
I see, okay, that makes sense, yeah,
To quell all of our,
yeah, okay.
And running, yeah, because some of those single wides may be on 10, 15 acres of.
Or 200
property,
acres.
Or 200 acres of property.
That doesn't make that regressivity problem in the first, it doesn't make it any better.
No, it doesn't,
Makes it worse, yeah.
but that's the issue. Okay,
All right,
we're done early.
what time are we supposed to come
We are
back?
supposed
Wanna
to. be
accelerate or?
back At
You have witnesses coming?
about 12 to 1 for lunch. And we're supposed to be discussing until 12, and it's only 11:33.
Can we come back at 12:30?
We can come back at 12:30.
Can you?
But, okay, and then, well, I don't know that we can move Jake up, can we? Isn't he first after lunch?
I'm going first. If you want.
You're first. Okay, can you do that at 12:30?
Julie is after lunch.
Oh, that's true. Julie's before.
They're not till
Okay.
2:45.
Okay. Okay,
Okay.
so we can move you back. We can go until 12:33 to give us an hour. All right, so that's good.